Well, for more on the promises made in the Glasgow Climate Pact, joining me now is Tiza Mafira. She's the Assistant Director at Climate Policy Initiative. Tiza, welcome to the program.
Hi, Azalea. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us here tonight. Some people have called the Glasgow Climate Pact a success, while others have called it a failure. Give us your thoughts on the final text, Tiza.
Well, it certainly did not achieve its intended target, but I think there's still some progress that we have to acknowledge that has been made. I think the failure that some people allude to refers from the fact that if we aggregate all the nation's pledges that were made, it does not amount to keeping global temperatures below 1.5 degrees Celsius. What it currently amounts to is a heating of about 2.4 to 2.7 degrees Celsius. So we're nowhere near where we need to be. Plus, that language that was supposed to say coal phase out now says coal phase down, which is a big difference, and I can explain that a little bit more. But there was some progress made. At least coal was mentioned. That is a milestone in and of itself, that there's acknowledgement that coal needs to be dealt with. And then there were, more commitments on financing, on adaptation finance, which I think was progress as well.
Well, yes, it was the first time that coal or fossil fuels was mentioned, but I mean, small island nations at risk from rising sea levels have really expressed disappointment over the Pact's watered down language that phase down instead of phase out. How significantly do you think the softened language will impact the world's efforts to rein in global warming? I mean, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said there's little difference between phasing down and phasing out coal. Do you agree with that?
No, I think there's a big difference with between phasing out and phasing down. Phasing out clearly means that we share a vision as a global community that we want what the climate activists and youth that have gone down into the streets have been shouting for. 100% renewable energy should be within our reach in the future. But if you say phase down, that means you're still contemplating a future where coal is a part of the economy. Now, that provides a loophole for domestic countries, not just India, not just Indonesia, but also industrialized countries, also the UK, also the US, who still have a portion of coal in their economy. It provides a loophole for them to say we need a certain amount of coal that we still need to maintain. And the problem with that is then we are bickering about how much percentage of coal should remain. Should it be 50%? Should it be 60%? Should it be 40%? That bickering and going back and forth is what's keeping us from achieving 100% renewable energy. Plus the fact that when you say you're going to phase down coal, that means very likely the country is still going to provide some subsidies, some kind of fiscal or financial support or policy support for incumbent coal, like Indonesia, who still has a lot of subsidies provided to fossil fuels, that keeps coal in its place and makes it difficult for renewable energy to compete. So I think that language is concerning, and we should, we now have homework to work around that language to make sure that it doesn't hamper acceleration of renewable energy.
Well, India was the country that demanded that last-minute change to phase down coal. The country says it's entitled to the responsible use of fossil fuels, to develop and to lift its people out of poverty. It's a sentiment shared by a lot of countries throughout the global South. Developing nations, feel this huge sense of injustice that Western nations have been able to get rich using fossil fuels, but are now denying the same benefits to the rest of the world. But in a recent Instagram post, you argue there's a different way that developing countries should look at this.
Absolutely. I think it's frustrating, that sentiment. It's frustrating that there's this perpetuation of this false notion that to develop, yes, we do need to develop, but there's a false notion that to develop, we need to emit. We need to reach peak emissions, and we somehow haven't reached peak emissions. And we need to burn as much coal as possible in order to become rich, and then we can start phasing down coal, which is false. Yes, the industrialized countries have been primarily responsible for the climate crisis because of this process of industrialization industrialization that they've already gone through way before us. But at the time, there were no alternatives that were readily and commercially available. We don't have to repeat the same mistakes that they have repeated, that they have done. We can now take advantage, being a developing country, we have a late bloomer advantage where we can immediately take advantage of the renewable energy that's already becoming commercially viable now, to develop in a way that's low emissions and does not require us to reach peak emissions. So rather than saying that we have the right to develop and therefore need to emit greenhouse gas emissions, we should say that we do not want to mess up the way that the industrialized countries have messed up before us. We will be better than the industrialized countries. And we have the knowledge, we have the local wisdom, and we have the technology that is now commercially viable to do that. That's what we're hoping that, developing countries will say. Unfortunately, that sentiment was not said.
Well, Tiza, COP26 is now over, but what comes next? What does your work look like going forward?
Global agreements are only as good as the commitment of domestic countries to implement what they've committed to. Especially a treaty as complicated as the UNFCCC. It really requires consistent implementation and application by the member countries that are party to it. And we've seen a lot of cases in the past where pledges were made, but pledges were not fulfilled. And this is something that basically our work is cut out for us. Our work is to monitor what the countries have pledged to and make sure that they actually commit to those pledges. What kind of emissions reductions have countries committed to? Let's look at that and make sure that happens. Beyond the Glasgow Climate Pact, Indonesia itself has made several commitments during this 2-week duration of COP26. It's made a pledge on forests. It's made a pledge on global methane. It's made a pledge to transition coal to clean energy. And it's made a pledge for coal early retirement. There are pros and cons. There are some people saying that these are not ambitious enough, and I would tend to agree that a lot more could have been done. But what's more important now is to see what pledges have been made and monitor whether the government is serious about implementing those pledges.
All right, Tiza, it's really about making good on those pledges and making sure they're able to be translated into action. Tiza, thank you so much for joining us tonight and for sharing your insights.
Thank you.